This black and white movie opens with a colored shot of the Polish-Belarusian border, the proverbial green border. It's the only color we see in the movie, the green of the trees so thick and so vast that no earth can even be seen. Agnieszka Holland's latest film, The Green Border, is an episodic film that intertwines the lives of different people along the border of the EU and the rest of the world, including a family of refugees, a border patrol officer, and a group of local activists. So, why did the Polish government call this movie Nazi propaganda? There's a moment near the beginning of the movie after the human traffickers who dropped off a family fleeing Syria made them run past the Belarusian border, where everyone stops to catch their breath. As a woman who joined the group checks her phone map, she shouts out, "We're in Europe, we're in the EU." For a moment there's laughter and a relief of tension. The worst part is over, they think. All that's left is to make it through Poland and meet up with a family member who's arranged transport for them to Sweden. But these expectations are quickly shattered during the first confrontation with the Polish border patrol. Green Border creates a mosaic of nonlinear narratives and conflicting ideologies that force the viewer to confront the reality of life on the border of the EU, a part of the world that regards itself as an upstanding example of democracy, human rights, liberty, protected by millions of euros invested into thousands of soldiers and weapons to protect this so-called garden within a jungle, as some would put it.
Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. It's the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that the humankind has been able to build. There's three things together. The rest of the world, and you know very well, Federica, is not exactly a garden. The rest of the world, most of the rest of the world, is a jungle. And the jungle could invade the garden.
The human rights activists, Polish people who have had enough with the violence happening mere miles away, committed by the state in their name, argue about which way would be the best way to provide help. Some people might have an issue with how much of the movie focused on the activists, but I think listening to Holland and the purpose of the movie makes it clear that this is a movie that openly calls for working outside of the legal system. I think not just a lot of directors, but also a lot of politicians would stop at just helping without interrogating what that help is actually doing. Within the group of activists, there is a clear distinction between those that are a part of the group that want to work inside the legal framework, like providing translations for legal documents to ask for asylum, and those who are willing to work outside of it and house refugees within their homes or smuggle them past border guards. And sure, while the translators are certainly a big help, it's only one of these two groups that actually gets these people into a safe environment. I think it's important to have movies with this message, especially in Europe, that makes a clear distinction between those trying to help within a system designed to systematically abuse refugees and those who are actually getting them out of this dangerous and oftentimes lethal situation. This isn't to discredit any activists on the border either. Any help is better than doing nothing, but the movie takes a clear moral stance on this issue that I do agree with. Then, of course, we follow the perspective of the border patrol guard, who was one of the most interesting perspectives to follow. He starts his story in a class at the Border Patrol Control Academy, where we get to hear the instructors actually talk about the refugees in question. There's a lot of brutality committed in this movie against lots of different people, and it might be hard to understand how a human could do this to another human. But one of the first things we hear the instructor say is the line, "These aren't people, they're Putin and Lukashenko's political pawns." Now, although that framing of the situation is already covered in racist connotations and devoid of any nuance in relation to the various socioeconomic conditions that force people to flee their home countries, it does provide a better understanding to the mentalities of the various border patrol guards and the EU foreign policy chief, which was that old guy in the video I showed earlier. We get to know one particular border guard quite well. He's involved in violent acts like the beating of pregnant women while trying to push them back to Belarus, and then just moments later is with his own pregnant wife trying to find out the sex of their own baby. He, like the other border guards and the other Polish people we see who passively stand by and watch the violence happen, or even go further to report suspicious activities and suspected refugees for them to be deported, are acting on pervasive social beliefs that dehumanizes and others an entire class of people. Then, last but not least, we have the Syrian family. For some reason, there's this perception of refugees or even other so-called economic migrants who are fleeing countries with food insecurity, poverty, lack of access to basic healthcare and education, or even violence, that families or individuals just make this decision on the fly, as if it was as easy as buying a plane ticket. People that choose to cross the border illegally know the risks they're taking, and weighed against their current situation have decided it would be better to flee. It's a last resort. It is not a decision that is taken lightly, and the pain of the parents as they understand what their kids are going through is felt throughout the film. As they cross the border to Poland for the first time, they flag down a police car and ask if they can be helped to get to their transport to Sweden. The police act nice, offer them water, and load them into a van full of other refugees, promising to get them to where they need to go. They drive them back to the border and then violently force them into Belarus. And then a brutal back and forth ensues, with refugees being repeatedly picked up, abused, and then spit back out on the other side of the border. Unnecessary violence takes place as well. Border Patrol guards intentionally target electronic devices and destroy phones. They take cash and destroy passports and legal documents. They violently beat and throw people over the border. One soldier even puts shards of broken glass in a water bottle that he then offers to men. None of it is necessary, of course, it's just justifiable under a dehumanizing worldview. The movie ends not with any character's involvement at the Polish-Belarusian border, but with a different border instead, the Polish-Ukrainian border. We see thousands of Ukrainian refugees peacefully crossing the border, being helped by some of the very same guards who had been previously brutalizing another type of refugee. The point the film makes is very clear. In 2022, Poland took in 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees, and that number has only grown, a fact that the Polish government is very proud of. Without saying anything, simply displaying the two separate realities of being a refugee in Poland from Ukraine and being a refugee in Poland from a non-European country, side by side, is enough for the reality to sink in. Poland didn't magically gain the ability to host 1.5 million people, nor did the border guards suddenly gain basic empathy. Poland's border policies work. They work exactly how they're intended to work. They work under the basic principle that some human beings are seen as individual victims, and some human beings are unnamed hordes of attempted political meddling by a foreign threat, under the principle that some humans can be successfully integrated into wider European society, while some humans are too violent, uneducated, or foreign to be let in, under the principle that some humans deserve to be helped, deserve respect, deserve decency and opportunities, while some humans, whether that be because of race, nationality, or religion, don't. The film ends on the Border Patrol guard we have been following through the movie. As he helps a family on a bus, one of his friends comments that these refugees are much calmer and easier to handle than the ones coming through the Belarusian border. The guard stops for a moment and hangs his head, maybe in guilt or shame, before telling her he was never even stationed there. Now, the reaction to criticism of the Polish government is about what you would expect. The film was immediately considered to be propaganda, and Agnieszka Holland was called a Nazi. A spokesperson for the Polish Border Patrol, Anna Michalska, even went on to say it was deliberately created to offend Polish people and that the whole film was untrue and that the perspective of the Polish guards weren't really shown. She said all of this despite a pretty big chunk of the movie actually focusing on Polish guards and the movie not even being released at the time of her statement. The Minister of Justice in Poland, wrote, "In the Third Reich, the Germans produced propaganda films showing Poles as bandits and murderers. Today, they have Agnieszka Holland for that." Funnily enough, some people compared it at the same time to communist propaganda. Whatever you want to call it, there's certainly no denying that the film is not made up. The abuses along the Polish-Belarus border are well documented. Poland and other EU countries practice a pushback policy where they round up refugees, detain them for a bit, and then drive them back to the border and dump them back into the forest. This can result in people being stuck for weeks in a cycle of abuses between Polish and Belarusian authorities, throwing unwanted people back and forth. Recently, a 5.5-meter-long wall was built along the border, but this hasn't stopped anyone from crossing the border. It's only made the problems worse, with human rights activists working along the border saying it hasn't reduced the amount of refugees crossing, but it has increased the number of injuries, like broken bones, they've seen. It doesn't help either that Poland has criminalized providing basic help for people crossing the border. The government says that it's still legal to do so, but this doesn't change the fact that there are, right now, people in prison and people being prosecuted for doing exactly that. This article here details one such case where a 20-year-old who went into the forest to provide basic help for refugees was arrested and charged with organizing illegal migration, a crime that carries a penalty of 8 years in prison. If you're interested in learning more, I've attached a report by human rights organizations that details the abuses the Polish government carries out against its own citizens who dare to provide any sort of assistance for refugees. This isn't just a problem in Poland either, though, as other EU countries have wrapped up their response to the refugee crisis. In Bulgaria, reports came through that they were using live munition on refugees. In Lithuania, a lack of drinking water, poor sanitary conditions, and restricted access to outdoor spaces were reported at detention facilities, with women specifically reporting that their privacy had not been respected, nor their medical needs properly attended to. In fact, it's becoming increasingly hard to even be accepted legally as a refugee, as in December 2021, only 54 of the 3,272 people who applied were granted refugee status. Sometimes, even when you are told you can stay, they may deport you anyway, as was the case with 5 Afghani men who, after the European Court of Human Rights told the Lithuanian government they should not be removed, were considered illegal anyway and subsequently deported. According to a study done by Border Violence Monitoring Network, 95% of people who had crossed the border into an EU country had reported witnessing or experiencing excessive force. I have to say, as someone who grew up in America, it reminds me a lot of how migrants are treated along the southern border as well, with historians now calling the facilities that hold tens of thousands of migrants in those states concentration camps. Now, this movie alone won't change anything. It takes a lot more than art alone to reshape the way a society looks at an entire class of people. But it's important that these issues are being highlighted, criticized, and presented to society, even if the reaction is to immediately call the filmmakers Nazis. Europe isn't just involved in human rights abuses across the globe, it's also involved in human rights abuses within Europe and even against its own citizens.
They're using pepper spray and water and tear gas against the children. Is this the human rights of Europe? 10 days we've been here without water, temperatures are -5, and what can we do? Where are the human rights organizations? We were a good country. They invaded Iraq in 2003. We've lost everything. We've sold our cars and sold our houses. They've destroyed our country, and now this is their human rights?
The movie certainly won't be everybody's favorite. It's quite slow, violent, sad, and there's even a Tarkovsky reference in the middle of it. But if you are unaware of what happens daily along the border of this so-called garden, then I beg of you to not only watch the film, but to educate yourself on the topic as well. Social problems like this one don't just disappear. They get worse until they explode.
The gardeners have to go to the jungle. The Europeans has to be much more engaged with the rest of the world. Otherwise, the rest of the world will invade us.